time, I officially welcome you to a panel discussion on historic preservation. This is the last session of our Arts and Crafts in August week, and a free session to those of you of the general public with an interest in historic preservation. And many of you, I recognize so many of your names. You are already involved in the historic preservation field, so welcome. Your voices, everybody's voices are welcome. And we want this session to be a constructive and educational one for you. Now, we do have some panelists here, but first, I would like to give a little introduction of my own to tell you all where I come from in the realm of historic preservation. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong screen, everyone. All right, so everybody has a hometown, and every hometown has an architectural legacy. Some are well known, and some just haven't been told yet. My own hometown of Petaluma, California, has a rich architectural history and a legacy that's been shown through walking tours, an active historic homes community with active voices in both the in-person and the online educational opportunities. And even in the later years of my life in attending college in the most northern part of California, Humboldt County, it presented its own architectural standouts, like the Carson Mansion and Old Town Main Street. And as you can see below, anybody who's been to the San Francisco Bay Area knows that San Francisco has its own rich architectural history. The image of the Painted Ladies down at the bottom is just one snapshot of the large architectural majesty that is San Francisco. When you get to experience youth in a vibrant and well-known area of coastal California, of course you have the importance of architectural history kind of in the background of your youth. And it comes up like it did for me as an adult. Now, the demolition of historic homes and buildings has been around for a long time, and I know I am preaching to the choir. There are so many of you that have long marched and protested and been involved in the right to preserve historic homes and buildings that images like these are really nothing new. The one to the left is, of course, from my hometown of Petaluma. The one to the right is right here in Asheville, North Carolina. In Asheville, there was a case for the Charlotte Street historic homes. And we will hear, of course, from the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe County about that case today. And historic preservation has been in the news. These news stories are just from the last 2 weeks alone. You have issues here from local clashes with preservationists and developers. Preservation grants are being awarded to historically Black colleges and universities, changes to zoning laws, support for local landmarks. These are all have been in the past 2 weeks, but just a simple Google search will indicate that historic preservation is still very much a relevant part of our culture today. But the efforts from local communities and also online communities are still coming in droves. You can see there on the left, my own hometown museum has an online exhibit on the importance of the local figures in the women's rights movements. Local people rallying at Des Moines City Hall are still putting up the fight. And even when there are national and federal resources like the Historic Preservation National Trust, you know that these resources are out there. And I did want to remind people that the National Trust of Historic Preservation, even though they couldn't be here today, are having their own Historic Preservation online conference in November. So if you are interested, please go and check that out. Now, lastly, here are some discussion points that I hope to cover in this session. As you can see, navigating change in your organization, we're going to hear from the Gamble House, and they'll tell us about the creation of the Conservancy, fundraising efforts, the importance of community outreach, both in person and via online platforms. Considering the construction process, we're going to hear from Gus Adams of Adams and Adams Construction, and being active participants. We really do want you all to use your voices today in an effort to hear from your fellow people in the community and also be heard by those in the historic preservation community. And I'm going to stop sharing. And at this point, I am going to toss it over to Alexandra Rasic of the Gamble House. So she will be our first panelist we're going to hear from today. Welcome, Alexandra. And I can't wait to hear what you have.
Thank you so much, Kate. I really loved your introduction. I thought that was lovely. And I don't know if you're planning on doing introductions of all of us, if you wanted to do those now at the beginning, or if you want to do them as speakers begin.
Yeah, we'll just do for each speaker.
Okay. All right, everyone. I am so pleased to be here with you all. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see a couple of beautiful pictures of the Gamble House here? Wonderful. Well, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Gamble House was built in Pasadena, California in 1908 as a winter home for David and Mary Gamble and their family, who were from Cincinnati, Ohio. David represented the second generation of family members associated with Procter and Gamble, which is where the family earned their wealth. The Gamble House is the most complete and best preserved work of American arts and crafts architects Charles and Henry Green. Those of you who are familiar with Green and Green's work know that in addition to designing magnificent stylized envelopes for living, they often design furniture and other things that you will find inside the house, including art glass windows and rugs. Now, the Gamble House Conservancy is dedicated to inspiring the public's appreciation and understanding of architecture as a fine art through the example of the Gamble House. As you explore its terraces, halls, rooms, and sleeping porches, you truly feel as if you're occupying a work of art with remarkable attention to detail found everywhere you look. Now, in 2020, following 54 years of administration under the University of Southern California School of Architecture, administration of the Gamble House was transferred to the newly established Gamble House Conservancy. Shifting priorities at the university prompted the change in administration, enabling us to develop and execute our own strategic plan as a nonprofit, with support from our newly formed Board of Trustees, our staff of 6, which at the time, which is now up to 8, working very closely with our dedicated group of volunteer docents, and our advisory board, which is made up of members of the Gamble family, our Board of Trustees, and staff from the city of Pasadena, who owns the house and collection, as it was donated by the Gamble family to the city in 1966. Now, as if that was not change enough, then came the pandemic, which prompted us, like many organizations, to rethink and modify the way that we do things. We developed a new, we developed a new exterior tour, a virtual tour, and you see, similar to what Kate showed at her local museum, you see our little dollhouse version of the Gamble House here for people to explore. And we also began delivering programs like this on Zoom, as many of us did and have attended and are still attending, which is wonderful to have as a resource. Another significant change that took place was the departure of Ted Bosley, our director of over 31 years, in October of 2021, someone who many of you are familiar with, I know. Ted's legacy of research, writing, and stewardship has provided the Gamble House with the resources needed to engage a new generation of advocates and enthusiasts. August 1st marked 5 months of uninterrupted interior touring of the house, which felt like a great victory to us. As we've experienced more regularity in our operations, we're beginning to explore new avenues of collaboration with local nonprofits that will help introduce us to more diverse audiences in our immediate community and regionally. Now, at the same time, we're making a point of continuing to engage with supporters of the Gamble House at every level who've been with us for a very long time, including our generous Founder Circle members, our friends of the Gamble House members, former scholars and residents, a community that's growing and becoming increasingly involved, and fellow Green and Green homeowners. Now, regarding the care and maintenance of the house, we recently submitted a grant application for the conservation treatment of our third floor roof features, which is jumpstarting a comprehensive plan to anticipate and prepare for conservation work in a timely fashion. Now, it's not uncommon that organizations of our size only have the resources and energy to deal with immediate needs. And we sure have those. But as we know, deferred maintenance adds to the bottom line of any project, and we aim to eliminate as much as possible by creating an ongoing conservation plan that's going to help inform fundraising efforts and public programs. Because we believe that increased public engagement with conservation projects will help us illustrate the degree of innovation, creativity, and craftsmanship that goes into this work, and get the public excited about the process. You know, we also understand that museum goers today want to explore historic places like the Gamble House in new ways. We do not want to be seen as a been there, done that destination. We want to inspire curiosity and connection so that people will want to keep updated and engaged in the work that we're doing. If they live locally, we want to be a source of pride for them in their community. And if they live further afield, we hope to inspire them to look more closely at the historic resources of their communities as they keep up with what's going on at the Gamble House. Now, in terms of audience and community engagement, we're trying to learn more about current and potential visitors through ongoing evaluations and surveys. We know that the Gamble House and many of our historic treasures will be a destination point for a percentage of our audience who are enthusiasts of architecture and preservation. But we also know that some people, including members of our surrounding communities, may not feel entirely comfortable in our spaces. And I purposely chose the picture that you see on your screen to help illustrate that point. The staff observes a couple of times a week visitors who may come after hours, either before we're open or after open, or on days that we're closed for touring to the public. They will park in our parking lot, which faces the beautiful Gamble House here. They will take a picture of that historic plaque that you see in the grass. They will take a picture or two of the house from the parking lot, and then oftentimes they will just want to get right back in their car. And staff now will approach folks who we see outside and will say, do you know that you're welcome to go up onto the terrace, that you're welcome to walk around the property and enjoy the beautiful gardens behind our garage? And we think that part of that is that people aren't used to having access to historic resources like this in their communities that they can occupy on their own. We don't have a fence around the property. We don't have a gate. We don't have signage saying keep out. And so the opposite we're seeing is true, is that because we don't have some of those things, people still feel like maybe this isn't a place I should be at right now because they look like they're closed. And we very much want people to be occupying the space and to be enjoying the Gamble House up close. So we think that giving people more choice and multiple points of entry to the Gamble House is going to be increasingly important. People are interested in accessing content on demand and on their schedule. We see virtual tours, audio tours, and social media where it's easy to share updates on preservation and conservation, and other online content as touch points that can facilitate more engagement. And I chose these two images of our architectural conservator working on the iconic front door of the Gamble House. And we shared those images, and people asked directly, not, they weren't just excited about the work they saw him doing, but they wanted to know what is it that he's using on the front door. And another one saying ditto on that request. There has to be a fair number of us who'd like to know that formula or product. And so there we have an opportunity to be a resource and to share it with visitors, letting them know that he uses TWP 1500. So something else that we were reminded of recently was make it easy. So we were reminded of this when we participated in the American Alliance of Museums annual survey of museum goers. We were concerned when we started to get data back that over 80% of our survey respondents were over the age of 60. But the survey analysts shared that this was typical for organizations like ours, and it's not to be discounted. This engaged group has the time to give us, and if we want to stay on the minds of busy middle-age enthusiasts who aren't quite there yet in terms of how much time they have to give, what we need to do is make visiting and attending programs as easy as possible. So drop-in programs, self-directed experiences, they can work better for this group. And Kate's kind of modeling that right now with the conference being virtual. This is something also with the on-demand content people can come back to if they didn't have time to watch a session. And I sent her an email this week thanking her for just that, because I couldn't come to some of the live sessions, but she had those sessions up immediately so that later that evening I could watch some of them. And I fall into that middle-aged category. So thank you, Kate. That was helpful for my schedule. So while they may not be quite there yet, we want to make their participation easy. So again, with the drop-in program, self-directed experiences. And so the hope is that when people do have more time to engage with us as visitors, as donors, even as volunteers, we will have stayed on their minds. So the Gamble House, very much wants preservation to be a constant in our public engagement, and we're thinking of more ways to be able to do that. So that's from me, Kate.
Thank you so much, Alex. Again, I just wanted to remind people, we will have a point where you can ask questions of our panelists. We do want to make sure everybody has a chance to present and share first before we get to that. And we will have a special interactive poll coming up for everybody to participate in. So let's continue on to David Rudd and Amy Shook of the Gustav Stickley House Foundation, also very well-known and friends to the National Arts and Crafts Conference. Welcome, David and Amy, and I can't wait to see what you have prepared for us today.
All right, thanks, Kate.
Hi, everybody.
Can we share the?
Yep.
Yeah. So the Gustav Stickley House, I've had nearly a 30-year history with it at this point.
Everybody see that?
Yes.
Oh, not on the right starting page. There we go.
There. Okay. So, like I said, I have nearly a 30-year history with this house, but only recently in the last 8 years have we been able to do anything as far as preservation on this home. It was owned privately and kind of not necessarily mothballed, but it wasn't open to the public or anything. But anyway, we were able to get the house donated. It was actually owned by the Stickley Audi company. Meany and Alfred Audi bought it from me, and they recently, well, about 8 years, I think it was about 8 years ago, they donated to an organization in Syracuse called University Neighborhood Preservation Association, and that started the ball rolling. We developed a foundation and went from there. But anyway, the house is a Queen Anne colonial revival, and it was. Can we go to the next slide, Amy? That shows the house. Yeah, this is the way it looked like in looks like maybe the 70s. It had it originally had a larger porch, but you'll see photos of that. But again, it's a Queen Anne colonial revival that Gustav Stickley purchased in 1900 when it was new, and it took until 1984 before it hit the National Historic Register. So we ended up with it, and we started doing the restorations about 2016, and formed the Gustav Stickley House Foundation. We have one contract development person, and that's the only person that's getting paid to do any of this work on the fundraising, but he's been very helpful. So why don't we go right into the fundraising and the next steps that we followed, Amy?
Sure. So I'm just going to jump back for just 1 second. I know this is a lot of detail, but in terms of this presentation, basically the highlighted yellow parts are kind of the really important parts. Why the house is important, when it became nationally recognized, and then where we kind of pick up, as David was saying. So this image right here. This is the only historic image we have of the exterior of the house from 1911, when it was sold for a whopping $16,000. When it left the Gustav Stickley's personal ownership. Later, it was purchased by his daughter, and he lived there actually until he died in 1943. Two. I always get that wrong. Two. Thank you. The preservation aspect has really been a grassroots and a collaborative project. These 4 organizations, UMPA, the Syracuse Land Bank, the Onondaga Historical Association, who will ultimately operate the structure, and us as the fundraising friends, have really done something unique with the support on the funding side and acquisition of funds. As Dave said, we finished the restoration project in 2018 for the exterior, and this was the before, the ugly before. You saw the pretty after, and we have primarily worked on this project both for the first phase, and then as we are turning to the second phase, which will be the interior restoration, with a local Syracuse company, Crawford and Stearns Architect and Preservation Planners. I think Beth Crawford is actually on this Zoom somewhere, but she fell in love with this property when she was in graduate school, and she literally crawled all over, above, under, sideways, in places I won't go, of this house, and has really helped us to kind of get this project where it needed to be. Phase 1, I'm just going to show you some pictures because I can. There was a lot of research that went into figuring out what we had, what we needed to do. There was a fire in the house, which is what triggered the interior restoration. She found porch parts underneath the old porch, and we were able to use that to build the new porch. Lots of this detail on the exterior that were restored. And our front door. I want to go back to this front door for one section and answer a question that was asked of me the other day. And of course, the image that you see here doesn't have what I'm going to talk about, but Bruce Johnson asked about the exterior hardware. And the exterior hardware is reproduction hardware. The interior is the original plate on the inside exists, but this was reproduced for us. So this was part of our original construction team, and you can see before our projected appearance and at the final. Phase 2, as you said, is returning to the interior look of the house, which is really the craftsman elements that make the house so unique. And similar to what Alex referred to, COVID hit us hard. We literally launched our capital campaign on March 5th, 2020, and 10 days later, the world closed. So we took a break, and we have re-engaged in our capital campaign for phase 2. But you can see what happened to the prices between 2020 and 2022. So this is made this an additional challenging process for us, but we are moving forward. Here's some interior images. The condition as it stands now. Amazing that the inside was not destroyed when it was apartments for over 50 years. It really is just remarkable. As we move forward, we will be putting an addition on the back, which you can see here, to provide for access, ADA access. There'll be an elevator, a public accessible restroom. The elevator will go from the first up to the third floors. And the project, I talked about the collaboration. Our end goal is to turn this into a combination historic house museum and a guest house. So you can come and sleep where Gus slept and where Gus used the restroom, ate dinner. There's, and be able to enjoy the way that we believe that he would want you to enjoy his home. So go downstairs, make yourself a cup of coffee, hang out in the living room, hang out in the Ingle Nook. And this is our target. So these are some renderings of where we're hoping to get to. And we are getting there. We are also doing we'll be doing some exterior work. So this is a projected site plan and design. Pretty simple, but much better than the look of it now. And again, we'll create accessibility and public access. The last piece of the puzzle, of course, is fundraising. And Kate asked us to talk about this, and I will kind of throw everything at you that I can. We have multiple layers of fundraising sources, and these sources will hold true for probably any historically significant property. For any of you who are considering to do historic preservation projects, there's layers of government funding. We have received all of these: local, state, federal, local community foundations are a significant source. We have received grants from our community foundation for phase 1. Dave mentioned our capital campaign. We have engaged a gentleman whose company helps us with our capital campaign project. He helps to manage the people, the events, the press, and then there's us, the board, and we, through communications, through events like these, organizations have been very generous to allow us a platform to talk about what we're doing, as well as our own websites and things of that nature, to keep people informed as to what we're doing. And it does take a village, but we hope people agree it's well worth it, and we are looking forward to getting more active again. In fact, we have an event in October that's scheduled so that we can get this interior taken care of. And I hope I hit all the points you wanted, Kate.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, that's a lot of good information.
It was a lot, I know.
I did want to address a question here in the chat because I believe it's relevant. Jay Patrick was asking, do you have interior photos from the early 20th century? If not, what is the basis of the artistic renderings of the restored interior spaces? I did want to make sure that question got answered.
That is an excellent question. Dave?
We do not have, we have one photo of the dining room that belongs to the Winterthur Museum in Delaware. Other than that, that is it. The In the 1903 Craftsman magazine, there's an article called "A Visit to the House of Mr. Stickley," and there's illustrations in there of drawings of different areas of the house, which have been very helpful. And they also have floor plans of the first and second floors that show footprints of furniture. So you can tell that there's a Gus Hex table in the center hallway. There's a clock against the wall, you know, the big sideboard, the Columbus Avenue sideboard that's now down at the museum in St. Petersburg. So we do have some clues to go on as to what was in there. Whether or not we're going to be able to get any of the original furnishings is very questionable. But we've one of the agreements on the gift from the Audi family and the contemporary Stickley company, they have agreed to make reproductions of the pieces that we need to stage the house. So hopefully we can follow through with that. But other than those illustrations that were pretty quickly put together, that's about all we have.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Amy. We do have a few more panelists that will present, but in the meantime, I do want to remind people that before our poll, we will have the opportunity to ask questions and answers of the audience. So please make sure you know where the raise hand button is. It's in your reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be, I see you, Karen, but hang on just a second. We will be inviting the audience to ask questions after everybody has presented. Now, in the meantime, I would like to toss to Erica LeClaire, who is Director of Preservation from the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe counties. And those who have been to our National Arts and Crafts Conference recognize them for sure. They are the ones that head up the Historic Homes Tour that happen annually with each conference. So Erica, welcome, and can't wait to see what you have for us.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to pull up my presentation real quick because there's some nice pictures that I'll share with you guys. Get into presenter mode. Okay, cool. Loading, so it's just taking a second. Here we go. Everybody can see. Okay, perfect. Like Kate said, my name is Erica. I'm with PSABC for short, so that's what I'll be saying, but the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe County. I am our Director of Preservation, which essentially means I deal with the technical stuff. We're a staff of 3. So we've got my boss, the Executive Director, Jessie Landell, as well as Jamie Moody, who helps out with everything. She does a lot of our operations things and fundraising things and event planning and just kind of everything. But I want to start with our mission statement, because this is what leads everything we do. And I think it's nice just to let everybody know what's going on. So to conserve Asheville and Buncombe County's heritage and sense of place through preservation and promotion of the region's historic resources. So this is where everything comes from that we do. And it encompasses a lot of different things. So these are photos from the last year of things that we've had going on, from Sandy Mush to downtown Asheville, essentially, including some archaeological work, which was a fun change of pace for a day. But it encompasses a lot. And this is going to be a short summary of a couple of the kinds of projects that we take on. But one of the things that has happened in the last year and a half or so is a demolition threat that has been begun to be undertaken. This is not necessarily the best preservation success story, but it was a learning experience for our organization and our community as a whole. So Charlotte Street, as you guys know, if you've been to the Arts and Crafts Conference, leads up to the Grove Park Inn. It is part of the Chestnut Hill National Historic District. And it was or it is, I should say, this block of houses of 13 historic homes. They're all contributing to the National Register, that we're all contributing to the National Register. And we're owned by one group for a period of years, who let them basically deteriorate over time. There were still renters living in them. They were broken up into apartments, but they weren't in great shape. So about a year and a half ago, we heard a rumor, and we're able to confirm that rumor, that the people who owned it were going to demolish all of these houses and put in its place a 5-story mixed use building, as well as townhouses and other retail and residential space. This is a very big lot, so there's a lot of old growth trees, 100-year-old trees. As you can see, there's some great vegetation around the houses, and most of these houses were 1920s or so. So there's a lot of really good materials in them. There's a lot of really, the structures were pretty sound considering. And we, of course, as the Preservation Society, were not okay with that. We went public with that knowledge shortly after finding out and confirming that. And that launched a year-plus long advocacy campaign against the demolition of these houses and this block. We put a lot of time and effort into creating materials like you see on the left side of the screen. This was the main part of a larger PDF, so hits the main points and then gets into detail on each of those points, including, as I saw in the chat, some of the reuse and recycling points that are very important in considering preservation work. As I said, it was a very large advocacy effort. So we kind of led groups in handing out signs, and we engaged the community. We let everybody know what was going on. We learned a lot about conditional use and city planning and ordinances. And we tried to explain it as best as we could. That's not always easy, but it's something that really helped the public understand what was going on, as well as help us understand what was going on, because it was something we hadn't done before. As an organization of 3, we just hadn't had this particular experience. And in the city of Asheville, in our larger region, we hadn't had a demolition threat like this since the 1980s. So we'd been a little out of practice on things like this. We had a lot of volunteers, as you can see, come out to protest. There was a couple of architects in a nearby neighborhood who put together some drawings of what infill development could look like, so to allow the houses to still stand, and then add density into that area with retail and residential uses. But unfortunately, though the developers took the project out of consideration, they decided to move ahead with demolition permits regardless. So there's currently demolition permits on all of the houses, and there are 4 or 5 of them that are down already. As you can see, there was a lot of debris, but still standing are a couple of them in this kind of state where it's partially demolished with some limited architectural salvage. So there's some materials that have been salvaged and will be reused, which is very, very positive. But it's still it's still not nearly as much as we would like to see. This has led to a lot of, sorry, getting ahead of myself, a lot of additional engagement in communities that we didn't necessarily have interest in previously, and has led to some different ways that we tackle certain things. In addition to this, we do education programming. So we do some online education programming and things, and we try to relate it as best we can to the things going on. So for example, there's a demolition threat at this church, and I'll get more into that project in just a minute. And we have an amazing volunteer, Dale Slesser, who does incredible research and puts together these architectural tidbits. I put it in quotes because they are tens of pages. They're 15-page research papers every month. It's pretty incredible. We've done walking tours around neighborhoods that could be impacted. So adjacent neighborhoods to the Chestnut Hills district where those houses were on Charlotte Street, are, because some of them are down, some of them aren't, as well as some youth programming and things like that. With, of course, an online component to all of this in the last 2 years as we've needed. So like I went over some of the Charlotte Street stuff, but some of the interesting things that have come about is people are listening to what we have to say. So preservation is on the forefront of a lot of minds because this was a citywide effort. There was over 5,000 signatures on a petition against the demolition of these homes. And that means there's people who realized that people care about our history and our historic resources. And you're not just going to be able to come in and demolish them without some pretty significant community engagement. One of the big projects for PSABC that has come out of this is the ownership of a couple of properties close to the downtown Asheville. We were able to leverage the advocacy we did in the Charlotte Street fight, as well with support of this neighborhood, the East End Valley Street Neighborhood Association, where these properties are located. And after we had found out about a demolition permit and the plans for the demolition of this historic 1926 church and a 1910 house, we were able to reach out to them and negotiate and cut a deal, basically. So there's some subdivision, they have some land that they'll be able to do infill on. But basically they didn't want an advocacy fight. They didn't want a preservation fight like they saw happen just a couple of neighborhoods over. And we were able to leverage that position with the support of the neighborhood. And we were in a relatively strong financial position to be able to purchase this property. So it's really exciting that we've been able to see a positive out of the Charlotte Street situation that wasn't so positive throughout that, the ending of that ending. I say ending, but hasn't really ended yet. And in addition to that, we've gained some more visibility throughout the county. So in Montreat, it's a little community outside of Black Mountain, if you're familiar with the area. So a little bit outside of town, further east in Buncombe County. But their community out there was facing a very similar threat to Charlotte Street. So there's several historic houses, including some of the oldest extant buildings, some of the oldest buildings still standing in the community. And because of Charlotte Street, they knew we were around. So they reached out with questions, and we've been able to help answer some of those questions and work with them to push their message and support their advocacy however we can. We actually act as their fiduciary agent. So because we're a 501c3 nonprofit, we can accept donations on their behalf. And because it supports our mission of preservation throughout the county, we then pay expenses on their behalf. This is ongoing. And again, the lessons we've learned from city planning and special use permits and all of those things have been very invaluable, because that's exactly the same thing that was happening here. There's a lot more to it. We actually have couple of architectural tidbits on some of these places in Montreat, and I highly recommend checking those out. So as I said, we try and tie these advocacy efforts to our education programming to make sure people understand why we care in the first place. Why are we making a big deal about something? It's because we have the documented history of the place, and it's important to our community. It's not just about us, it's about what the community thinks. And as a staff at a small nonprofit, that's the most important thing we can do, because that's where we get our support. And we've been able to build some some pretty strong networks that way. Yeah, so that's what I have.
Erica, thank you so much. I know being an Asheville citizen, and a lot of these people here today do know Asheville, and it's very close to their hearts. We absolutely appreciate the efforts that the PSABC has put towards this. I did want to pass on a question in the chat. Susan was asking about what you learned, and I think you did address that. What would you do differently now if this happens again? Would there be anything you did differently?
I'm not sure, because I think each project is very different. So with Charlotte Street, there was clear documented history of the neighborhood, clear evidence of its significance, as well as clear community support. So we knew immediately, it's like, we need to get ahead of this, and we need to make a statement and say that we don't like this, and this isn't okay, which is what we did there. And we did whereas with Montreat, we didn't really hear about it until kind of later, a little bit later. And then at that point, the neighbors started reaching out to us, and we said, okay, what do you need from us? How can we support you? Because you know what's going on, and we don't necessarily have as good of an understanding. And we've then kind of taken on a different role. So we've been more of an advisor versus the people leading out there. And in a very similar way, like I said with the demolition threat in the East End Valley Street neighborhood, where we ended up purchasing those properties, we again went to the neighborhood and said, what can we do to support you in this? We asked if they were concerned about it, if we should even be worried about it, and they didn't want to see those properties lost. And there wasn't necessarily the availability for the neighborhood or for individuals to purchase those properties. So we presented the option for us to buy the properties and start working on rehabilitation, and then work with the neighborhood to figure out what the end use will be. Because we won't own those long term, but we'll work with the neighborhood to figure out whether housing will go in or what those will look like. So it's ongoing. And we take a very different role in each of these projects. It just depends. And I know that's not an easy answer. It's kind of a cop-out on my part, but it really does.
Thank you so much, Erica. There are a couple more questions in the chat, but I did want to make sure we get to our next panelist first. So you will have opportunities to ask this of our panelists, even if you addressed it in the chat. I'd like to introduce Gus Adams of Adams and Adams Construction. He is very much a friend to the conference, as you'll find him on the staff of our conference as well. He's well beloved in this community and by our conference. I'd like to welcome Gus to share what he has to share. Welcome, Gus.
Well, gosh, well, thank you, Kate. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I am, as Kate said, Gus Adams. I'm with Adams and Adams Construction, and we specialize in fine home renovation and historic preservation. I am a licensed general contractor in the state of North Carolina, and I hold a post-baccalaureate certificate in historic preservation. And we live in Asheville, as I say it, and we're active in preservation all across Western North Carolina. Actually met with Erica and Jesse over at those properties, Cappadocia Church, and even before it was purchased, just to discuss options and things like that. So the first thing I'd like to say is the greenest building is the one that's already built. I wish I could have coined that phrase, but that was architect Carl Elefante. And we are not going to build our way to sustainability. Erica was mentioning, the demolition projects on Charlotte Street, which is absolutely heartbreaking. But, a new construction project generates about average size home, about 8,000 pounds of waste. To demolish one of those homes on Charlotte Street generates about 60 tons of waste. So if you multiply that by 13, I mean, that's a serious amount of waste going into our local landfill. Also, I don't want to say that preservationists are not against development, but just needs to be developed in the right way, infill. There was a great plan for Charlotte Street that just got ignored by the developers. But in general, preservationists are not against development, just let's do it properly. And then not even necessarily against new construction. If we're going to do new construction, sure, make it a net zero home. But even with that, even though it's a net zero home, it still creates a debt to the carbon footprint, about an 80-year debt to the carbon footprint. And a lot of new construction homes are only built out of materials to last 50 years. So, there's a lot to be said to preserving your existing housing stock. And I was actually at a economic forecast meeting recently. Rob Dietz from the National Association, he's an economist with the National Association of Home Builders, and to my surprise, was mentioned in his report the importance of existing housing stock and preserving that. And I, took a minute to talk to him after the meeting, and of course, was just told him how thrilled I was that was coming from the National Association of Home Builders. And we talked facts, and it's just, so we're making some noise, which is great. So I've got some pictures. I'm going to share my screen. Kate wanted me to talk about actually a project we did a few years ago, the Child's House. Let's see. And let me get over here. All right. So there we go. All right. Okay, so the Child's House, this is a house in the Kenilworth neighborhood of Asheville. It's a colonial revival villa. It was built by Jake Childs and designed by architect Robert Green from like 1922 to 1925. So one of the first things we have is some historically inaccurate trim. That's like a 4x4 and a 2x4 that was put over around the windows to hide damaged plaster. And somebody mentioned, Alex mentioned at Gamble House, deferred maintenance. Well, this house is a great case for the deferred maintenance, because if it doesn't take like a day for water to damage wood and to damage plaster or stucco. I mean, it takes a while. It takes years. It can take several years for this to happen. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that if you're just taking care of a small problem before it became a large problem, you wouldn't have the expense involved in taking care of these deferred maintenance issues. So that trim, in this case, that trim was removed, and this is we've got a repair in progress here. This is an arch window in the living room where some of that oversized and historically inaccurate trim was removed, and we're doing our repair work there. Okay, so this is a little shot of the Child's House living room or gathering space. If you notice, there's a little piece of wainscoting to the right of the stairs there. Part of undertaking a historic restoration historic preservation, rehabilitation, or restoration project, part of that is discovery and exploration. So as my experience has told me that, let's explore the attic, let's explore the basement. There's maybe some missing pieces of trim. Oh, there's that door that somebody took out however many years ago. It doesn't always play out like that, but in this case, we found a lot of trim, in particular in the basement, and that piece of wainscoting was still in the basement. I mean, thank goodness. And we were able to determine that that's where that went from some old pictures. So another great resource, like Dave and Amy had mentioned, we have one picture of the dining room of the Gustav Stickley House. Well, I mean, imagine how helpful it would be to have, many pictures of the interior of the Gustav Stickley house to help us like know what it's supposed to look like and know where some of these parts and pieces went. So we actually took that piece to the Adams and Adams construction shop and were able to get that back in shape and mill some pieces and get that back in place. And it's a gorgeous piece of wainscoting. I know it seems like a little thing, but you see that piece further beyond it, it totally made the room like complete again. And, just a note, just to check these places out. Maybe you haven't been in your own basement or attic to see what treasures you may have that you can reinstall in your home. And so this is actually from our shop. This is some newly milled trim that we had made to make up for the pieces that had been removed. And that's some flat stock, and the pieces you see drying on the ladders there are some base cap. And, we got a stain match and match the finishes as closely as possible, but you still will have to potentially create some new pieces, but you want those to be, accurate with what was existing. And this is a little profile of that base cap, a really interesting piece of molding. You'll notice the angle at the top and then the little chamfer there at the bottom. It's a really unique, at least unique to me, piece of trim in the fact that it doesn't just set on top of that square or that flat stock, the flat baseboard. That angle leaned against the wall to push that trim out a little bit, and then that little chamfer set on the corner of the flat stock that's the baseboard. And so it gave a really great detail. And throughout the house, that piece had been taken off. Fortunately, we found some pieces in the basement that we could make a profile from, but who knows why it was removed, because it's absolutely, while being so simple, it's just a real design aesthetic that added to the whole appeal of the child's house. Okay, so here's a good little case study. This is there's three bathrooms at the child's house. There's the blue bathroom, the red bathroom, and then there's the primary bathroom. This is the blue bathroom, and you will notice like robe hooks, towel bars, the toilet paper holder, another robe hook. There's some structural damage up in the corner where you can see the cracked towel. All of these things were added over the years, and you could have very easily the homeowners could have said, we want to demolish this bathroom and we just want to go back new. And fortunately, we were able to have a good discussion about not only the money that could be saved, but just the effect of destroying all this, and then the impact on our environment and the landfill. Some of you may know or not, but when this tile was installed, a concrete or mortar mud bed that could potentially be anywhere from 1 to 2 to 4 inches thick was installed with metal lath, and then the tile was put over the top of that. Same thing with the floor. You'd come in, the old tradespeople would come in and chop off the top of the floor joists and install boards to then carry a 3 to 4 inch mud bed of concrete to put the floor tile on. So I mean, we're looking at a lot of pounds of waste just created by demolishing this. Fortunately, our homeowners wanted to preserve this bathroom. This is just a close-up of that structural damage. And so what we were able to do is we contacted a historic tile company that was able to recreate, like color match and recreate our existing tiles. They were the machine that they created them with created a tile that was a little bit larger than what we had. So we were able to cut those down back at the Adams and Adams shop. But as you can see, we've gotten rid of all the towel hooks or towel bars and robe hooks and all the other wall penetrations and all the damage. And we've got the bathroom back to basically its, original condition. I mean, it would have taken so much work to have gotten this thing demolished and then reconstructed. And yes, it was a lot of tedious work to get it to this point. But not only did we preserve the bathroom, we were able to preserve the original aesthetic of the Child's House. This is just some little quick note. This is some hardware that we cleaned up and got back in shape. It was designed by Anthony Lord, local architect and metal artisan. Some really great hardware. We certainly discussed, like, there's the original patina. Our homeowners really wanted to tighten it up and get it back to what it looked like when it was first constructed. So just a little note about that. Just some really gorgeous hardware. Some of it had, these are some pictures that are on the wood. Some had paint on it. There's very easy methods to get paint off of your existing hardware. So this is part of the lower section of a French Dutch door. Child's House has several of these. When I say French Dutch, it's like a French door that opens, the left and right hand side open, or you could leave the bottom closed and then the top opens. And I've got a picture coming up showing what that looks like. But again, deferred maintenance. This didn't happen overnight. This is something that, was wet for years and just got neglected. So we took it back to the shop. We were able to, get rid of the rot. We recreated original pieces from the pieces that had not been completely rotten and destroyed. And we have this is a primed piece before we got it back to Child's House. And that's what it looks like now. And so those doors are incredible. And like, if you had, yes, you could have retrofit new doors. That would have cost a fortune. This was not an inexpensive project, but it still worked out to be more cost effective than purchasing new. The other thing we were able to do is get the weather stripping. There's like some snap bronze in there that was not existing. So we've helped weatherize the house, as well as create the, no more air blowing through there where it had, gaping holes where it had rotted out. And that's just, speaking of the weatherization, that's another thing that that you can do to your existing home. We don't necessarily want to like blow the walls full of insulation. But okay, so let me back up a little bit. 70% of your net loss and gain of heat and cold escaping your home is not out the sides of your house. 70% is through the roof or down through the basement. Only 30% is through the sides of the house. People are like, oh, my windows, I have to replace my windows. If you have your original historic windows, do not replace them. You can get them working again. There's companies probably in your area that can weatherize them. These windows have been in your house for over 100 years, 80 years. The wood that they were made out of, we can't even buy that wood anymore unless it's reclaimed. Anyway, don't get me started on all the great reasons to keep your existing windows. We're working on a project now that we've had a local restoration company come in. They pulled the windows. Not only are they getting them back in shape and fixing the damage, they've put silicone bulbs or silicone strip around to help that air gap. So anyway, that's preserve your old windows. And then you do want to insulate above and below, but you want to do it in the right way. And each home is a little bit different. You want to talk with your qualified building professional about the best way to insulate your home, but certainly you want to insulate. Certainly you want to do these things, maybe an encapsulated crawl space to improve your air quality. All these things are things that you can do, but you want to do it the right way for your home. So thank you very much. I really appreciate being asked to do this and being on a panel of such esteemed guests. So Kate, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for being here. I'm very honored that I've had an opportunity to speak with y'all.
Well, we're honored that you came on, and we're so inspired by the visuals that you've provided us today. Before we move on to the next portion of our session, I did want to ask the question that was asked in the chat that has gotten a lot of response. I do want to make sure that our panelists do have a opportunity to weigh in. I know a couple of panelists have already weighed in the chat. Juan asked the question, does the city have any legislation, the city of Asheville, have any legislation in their municipal code that supports historic preservation in the city to help your efforts? Clearly, local city support is always wanted, but sometimes it seems like there's always never enough. So Amy, I'm going to give you the first opportunity to take a response to this question.
Thanks, Kate. First, I just wanted to point out, I love that the Asheville duo both have the same wall color. We might need to like rename that wall color. Excellent.
Well, I tell you what's really funny is I'm actually not in Asheville right now. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. But I noticed that too, Amy. That is pretty funny.
Well, and I actually thought it was really great having Gus talk about sort of the more kind of private restoration side. You know, obviously our project is a more public restoration, and historic preservation is it ain't cheap. You know, that's the reality. But one specific question about municipal codes, I can say in Syracuse, we have a very unique situation, and I think Beth addressed this in the chat. We actually have local landmark status through the city of Syracuse on the Gus House, and it's not only on the outside but on the inside, which is extremely unusual. A lot of times neighborhoods just want to retain the facade and then allow the interiors to be you know, adapted in other ways. On a project like ours, because of the historic preservation situation, not only do we have the local municipal, but because of funding that we've obtained, we have covenants at both the state and the federal level that also oversee and dictate what can happen to the house in the future. And I believe that the federal covenants actually extend for 50 years. So it's a really challenging thing to manage the historic preservation, live in a modern world where people like, you know, proper flush toilets and air conditioning and kitchens that function. But having those designations really is important. And it is extremely important that you find a good, qualified, skilled, good track record professional to help you, as we have with Crawford and Stearns. And I know Gus, the GPI gatekeeper, has his certification as well. And that's really important as you're moving forward with your projects, whether it's going to be a public facility or a private facility.
All right. Before we go on to our next question, does any of our other panelists have any follow-up comments?
No, but as I alluded to in the comments in the chat, local preservation ordinances are very important, but they differ they can differ state to state. So, for example, I know there are certain regulations over National Register listed properties in like the state of Washington, which is very different than most other states throughout the country. So it varies significantly, and understanding what your local situation is imperative in taking on any kind of project like this, because it can be so different.
Thank you, Erica. All right, now we're going to go ahead and get a couple questions from the audience before we go to our special interactive poll. And I would like to remind everybody to use the raise hand feature found under your reactions button. So at this time, I would like to call on Jane Matthews, who has her hands raised. So welcome, Jane, and go ahead and ask your question. Is Jane with us? Did we lose her?
No,
Are
I
you on
forgot,
mute?
I forgot to unmute. Thank you, Kate. It's not a question, but it's just more a comment or information. As Erica said, local historic district in our area has been helpful to preserve bodies of properties. But the other thing that North Carolina has that not many states has is it has not only the National Register federal historic tax credit, but it also has a statewide residential historic tax credit for historic properties. And that has been really helpful. At least I live in a historic district, and it's been helpful in preserving both residential buildings and commercial buildings in the area. So it's an important tool, that if your state can, give you that authority, it gives you some savings on investing in your historic property over its lifetime.
Yeah, if I may jump in, that's a really great point. And actually something I forgot to mention was certainly the tax credits, but the resources that you may have in your state with your state historic preservation officers. I've talked to those people all the time, as well as our local preservation folks, like with Erica and your preservation office. These people are great resources. I'm not trying to throw more work on y'all, as I know you're really busy, but for me, it has proved invaluable to have folks like Erica, Jennifer, Kathy, Brett Sturm, all our folks that are state historic preservation officers. They want to help, and they are the folks that you can contact. And you can, I'm sure, go to, just Google that in your state or city and find the people. They want to help, and they are absolutely fantastic resources. I forgot to mention that. And the tax credits too are very good incentives. And it's like dollar for dollar, so
Yeah,
anyway,
it's a
sorry.
great incentive. I think the other thing to add is that, I know I've used, as an architect, I've used a lot of projects, preservation, used recycled materials, and I'll look at, go to wherever there's architectural salvage available to try to find materials that are of the period for the project that I have to use for restoration, or, use, resources in the back of like Old House Journal or other magazines, look for people who are actually making the products that were used similar, or hardware that's similar to what would be found in the house, if you have to match things or add things.
We've had clients. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a great point too. We've had clients that have saved items and found items just for their preservation, maybe not a preservation project, for the project for that perfect place. So yeah, that again is another great point.
Well, we had dozens of doors that we bought over years from the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe County as part of salvage projects. And my husband and I photographed those. And when we renovated our house, we installed lots of doors in new places. So, we reused them.
All right, thanks everybody. Just as a reminder, I did extend this special session to 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time just to accommodate. So I will call on a couple more questions, but make sure that you hang tight with us because we have a special interactive poll that we'd like to discuss after we see the results. So go ahead, David, with your question.
This is for Erica. My partner, Mary, just moved to the Manor Inn, which is on Charlotte Street, last fall, and we noticed all the Save Charlotte Street signs when she moved in. I don't see so many now. Have you conceded the battle? Has he gotten all the approvals he needs to build his 5-story units? Or is it just that's a second chapter in the battle?
I think that's exactly it. It's the next chapter of what that looks like. Once the project was taken off the city council agenda and completely withdrawn, it was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. So a lot of people started taking down their signs and things like that. And shortly thereafter is when the demolition permits went in. And then within a couple of months, some of the houses were demolished. What we kind of foresee happening is that the project will be returned to city council and the city system once all the houses are down. Once they're demolished and once there's nothing else that can be done with that land, that would make sense for the developers to come back with that project. But that hasn't happened yet. I pay attention to the new permits on the city website very closely. So we're watching that, and it will just be the next chapter, another chapter too.
Has he proposed any designs for the new construction?
There is a design for, I don't think they're technically called townhouses, but they're essentially townhouses on one of the off streets from Charlotte Street. So it's on Baird. There are going to be 19 townhouses or townhouse-like units on that street in place of the houses that have already been demolished.
There is some commercial buildings on the southwest corner that are quite period appropriate. And it would be kind of nice if he could, carry on that motif.
And which is something we've been advocating for as well, but it's been a tough sell.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Juan, go ahead and ask your question of the panelists.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's a little bit
Hear me?
choppy, but we can hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'll just ask my question in the chat. Thank you, Kate. I'm having a connection problem.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, I guess we can continue on to our special poll, and we can always come back to this. So if Jim, if you would like to actually, you know what, hold on. Before you trigger that poll, just a quick note. This poll is meant to just kind of take a survey of what you think the top issue facing preservation of historic sites is. We might not have gotten them all. So if you feel that there is another top issue facing historic preservation, please make sure and mention it in the chat and we can always discuss it. So Jim, if you would go ahead and send that poll to everybody, it should pop up on your screen momentarily. And it is a it's a single choice question, but we can always discuss the results afterwards. So is everybody getting the poll at this point?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So go ahead and put in all of your choices, and then we discuss. And Jim, is there a way to display the results?
Yeah, we're going to display the results, and just so everybody knows, the answers are lengthy. So if you want to just stretch the box, or even if you hover your mouse over the different answers, it'll give you a better picture. And let's see what kind of percentage we get answering. So far, we have 14% answering.
Okay. And so while we wait for people's answers to come in, I do want to catch up on a couple of the comments in the chat because this has been a very active chat. Alan and Janet have weighed in. Alan said local preservation groups need to have strong attorneys. We have an excellent CEQA, California State Environmental Laws lawyer. Having a strong organization means fundraising to pay for top attorneys. Janet says not all cities are easy to work with, and some are hostile towards historic preservation. Obtaining designation of districts is great and could take years, especially if the city is doing the research and managing that funding. Looks like there is a discussion on LEED defined. Looks like Beth said National Register is a nice honorary designation, but it won't always prevent demolition by a private, think private developer entity. And our National Register designation will help in a case government entity, city, state, county, or feds wants to demo your property. The Gustav Stickley House is nationally registered, listed, which makes it eligible for state and national preservation grants to non-for-profits. Also, the GSH is, locally designated both the exterior and the interior, which is very unusual and terrific. So good for that. Alan says, we have a bumper sticker that states, I'm a preservationist and I vote. It takes time, but hopefully a loss becomes motivation for the future, getting people involved, voting for preservation-minded local and state people. Not easy, but preservation is not for the faint of heart. Very good comment. I'm wondering if maybe Alan, you would like to, while we're still waiting for results to come in, unmute yourself and talk a little bit about your comment in the chat.
Yeah, I'm with. I see Alana Coons is here, and she can probably articulate it better than I can. She's part of our leadership team in San Diego. I'm a board member, but she's somebody whose husband is executive director, and she's involved in education and has 30 years experience in historic preservation in San Diego. Alana, if you can unmute, she can articulate San Diego's perspective at our preservation battles and what's worked and hasn't worked. We've had some major losses and some major wins. Alana, are you willing to?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hi, Alana.
Hi. Actually have, hold on, I was just submitting my question there too, my poll answer. I guess I was just going to follow up on one of the things that Alan had talked about. A good lawyer is important, but only if you've got the preservation laws that they can work with. So a lot of California's and environmental laws and things that we can work with. So it's important to work on legislation and to, as Alan was saying early on the bumper sticker, to vote accordingly, get people who are interested in preservation. It's pretty hard here in California due to development, due to all of the pressures on development. Pretty intense here, especially in a place like San Diego on the Pacific Rim. And
Thank you for that. Looks like we got some people in the chat mentioning developers targeting the demolition of older but not necessarily designated properties and uninformed elected officials. Looks like there's a lot of agreement there. Let's see, how about we take a look at the poll results coming in?
I think something strange happened. Just hold on one second there. Somebody may have tapped the button accidentally somewhere. Give me just a minute to see what we did here.
All right. Yep. Looks like there's a lot of agreement with Beth on developers targeting the demolition of older properties. While we get the poll coming back, would anybody like to comment on that further?
I'm going to make a comment because something that I think that is really interesting that has started to happen in the last 6 years, very distinctly 6 years, is the rise of deconstruction ordinances. It really started in Portland, Washington. They were the first ones in the US to have a deconstruction ordinance, which required any properties that were either designated or built before a certain year. It started at 1916 and has since changed to be deconstructed versus demolished. So if there was going to be a house taken down, a property or structure taken down, it had to be done in a way that the materials could be reused in a different project. And that is something that has been kind of growing outside of there. Portland, it was very much focused on the environmental impact, but in somewhere like San Antonio, which has recently taken on a deconstruction ordinance, it's definitely focused on historic preservation.
Great comment. It looks like Jane had a comment. I think preserving community character is one pressing issue, not losing what attracted all of us to the community. And yes, to inclusivity, it is truly important to build and maintain our community. Very good points as well. So any other comments on a couple of the points that we've raised so far?
Beth Crawford talking about the targeting demolition of older but not necessarily designated. I mean, that's right on point. I mean, your building only has to be only 50 years old to be considered historic. So that's a lot of buildings in the U.S. that are considered historic. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like I say, I mean, it's almost become my catchphrase, but the greenest building is the one that's already built. Like I can't say that enough. Good point, Beth.
Absolutely. All right, looks like we got a couple of hands raised. Go ahead, Gary, with your question / comment.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that even if a building has some type of historic status, there's various layers of historic status. Sometimes it only protects the facade of a building and not the interior or the building itself. We here in Los Angeles, we're having a very difficult time with our city council members taking what are called campaign contributions to allow developers to ignore all of the building and safety codes, not do environmental impact studies, doing things that, spot zoning in neighborhoods. On Hollywood Boulevard, the historic Pig and Whistle restaurant, which was the last surviving one, recently got a new leasee, and that person went in with no permits at all and began demolishing the interior of the historic building. And when preservationists set up a cry, he put up a video on Facebook of him personally, the new leasee personally walking through the property with a sledgehammer and destroying the historic interior with the sledgehammer as an FU. And even though the city had put a cease and desist order against the demolition, he continued to just do this, and he's open today. And it's just been an uphill battle with things like this. So you have to have a city council that's willing to ignore the campaign contributions and at least take an active role in preservation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to make sure, and we did get a notification. Apparently there was a little bit of a technical difficulty with the poll. If you guys wouldn't mind taking it again, we do apologize for the technical difficulty. But in the meantime, with that, Fran, I want to make sure we get to your question or comment. So go ahead and unmute yourself and say what you need to say.
Okay, there it is. I voted other, and I mentioned in the thing that it's a perspective of restoration, if you will, of a building that was demolished years ago, before I knew anything about preservation or anything. All right. My interest is specifically the administration building for the Larkin company that Frank Lloyd Wright built at Darwin Martin's direction, basically. And it was destroyed, demolished, and turned into a parking lot in the 1960s or so. All right. And the factory buildings around it are still there and are actively being reconstructed, reused as office buildings, and it's a very vibrant part of the city of Buffalo now. My notion is that what should now happen is there's a little room museum gallery that deals with the Larkin Company in the existing Larkin buildings. What would be appropriate would be to rebuild the Larkin administration building partially in such a way that the steel framework that Frank Lloyd Wright designed would be open through glass frames so that the building could be used as a home for the little gallery that is the Larkin building, the Larkin Company history, and also serve as an educational tool as to how Frank Lloyd Wright architecture that he put into that building, like heating, air conditioning, all the things that were brand new at the time, could be demonstrated by having a skeleton frame of the part that hides the inner workings of the building.
Okay, any follow-up to that? Maybe some of our panelists would like to weigh in? Or anybody in our room?
Well, I'm not sure what feasibility there may be there, but Fran, you make a good point. There are structures that have had like glass, glass built around them to preserve them. So it's a good point. I'm not particularly familiar with the building that you're talking about, but maybe one of our other panelists does, or somebody out there may know something a little more.
Maybe if there's anybody in the room who might know a little something about the Larkin Company. We've got some we've got some minds that have a great wealth of knowledge of some of these countrywide historic sites. But it looks like we can. Oh, Alan, go ahead. Ask your question.
No, just the Larkin building off the top of my head is 1905, Frank Lloyd Wright's first commercial building, torn down. And Wright was a bit odd. He didn't seem to really be a preservationist, but I think he was upset. Was it 1948 that the Larkin was torn down, and it was rather difficult to tear down. And he was upset when the Roby House was threatened in the 1950s. But the Larkin building should never have been torn down. And there's a discussion is if something is lost, should we recreate it? And that happens. We visited Philadelphia years ago, and I was a bit disappointed that a lot of the Revolutionary War sites were reconstructions. And it's better to have a reconstruction than nothing. But I would rather see the original. But sometimes that's not possible. So having a reconstruction can allow people to interpret the space and what was once there and have visualizations inside of it. Buffalo is a great architectural city, and the reconstruction of Larkin would be terrific.
Looks like Susan Frost says in the chat there's a great virtual tour. Go ahead. Go ahead, Fran.
I understand the possibility of a virtual tour, but that's not my notion. All right. Buffalo has recreated many of Frank Lloyd Wright's designs. I'll give you the example of the gas station in the Auto Museum in Buffalo, the mausoleum building at the cemetery, and the boathouse along the Niagara River. So it is not a place where they haven't done this. What I'm thinking is that the building would be 1/4 restored entirely, And then the free steel frame would be extended so that it could be visually pointed out how the air conditioning worked and what the features were that were original to Frank Lloyd Wright in that building that became predominant in any commercial construction.
Okay. Jane, go ahead and unmute yourself and
Yeah, just a comment for Fran. The problem I see is it's a fundraising effort. I mean, it can be done, but there aren't tax credits for new construction. So you would have to, have some kind of organization to fundraise. And as we know from the organizations that spoke today, how difficult it is right now, particularly with the cost of construction. So that's kind of what you face. I mean, anything can be done, and and new uses can be put to a new addition, but it's just raising the money to recreate something. That's the challenge.
Yes, I understand that, and I'm prepared to wait for the gold mine that is being discovered under the glacier in BC to realize its potential, in which case I will then fund the building.
Great.
All right, so it looks like we got another question here in the chat. Juan reached out to me. A few of you have already mentioned what you think in the chat, but I did want to bring up what locally is being done to reach out to communities of color regarding education and advocacy efforts in historic preservation. Would there be anybody in the room who would like to answer that, or maybe one of our panelists?
Yeah, I responded in the chat as well, but something that is very important to our organization is we're not going to tell somebody what they need to preserve. We explicitly go to the neighborhood first. So, for example, the properties we purchased in the East End Valley Street neighborhood, it's a historically Black neighborhood. And so once we knew that there was a demolition threat, we didn't make any moves until we talked to the neighborhood association, until we talked to community members, because we're not going to come in, I'm not going to come in as a white preservationist and tell them that they need to save this building when they might not care. And that's not our job. Our job is to preserve what the community cares about and what they think is important. In this case, they thought these two structures were important enough for us to come in and help preserve. So that's what we did. And we're also working on education programming. I know that's something that a lot of groups are focused on throughout the country and locally, is working on education programming, because these groups have been groups of color have been historically excluded, and we need to kind of rectify the fact that there is a lot of information out there, and it's our turn to present it, to do the work and do the research and support communities of color where we can, and help be a resource in finding that information and getting it out to the public.
And I think finding ways of additional new collaborative opportunities. So your organization may not have those relationships established as of yet, but how can you in a very genuine way partner with another organization that does, and learning with them, in building that capacity and showing that it's something your organization cares deeply about?
Both very well said responses. Karen, go ahead. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. Oh, looks like
there.
We hear you now.
Okay, now you can see me and hear me. I'd like to address the situation with the Los Angeles, with the guy doing the video of demolition. In the state of Washington, in our little town, Port Townsend, where I used to live, I now live in Asheville, we had mandatory review, but voluntary compliance. And that seemed to set better with people in a historic district without a national historic designation in every building, but to have designers like myself and other people volunteer their time to review the changes or the color that they were considering painting the building. And then based on the concept, if you're given free advice and education of why that seems more appropriate, that people would voluntarily do it. It's a very unique way of doing it. Maybe it's not possible in a larger city. This was a town of 7,000 people, and it was much, much easier to do with the city councils. But that concept, instead of shoving something down people's throats, lots of people don't want historic designation because they think there's going to be a cop that comes and knocks on their door and says, you can't do that. And the American spirit is like, I get to do whatever I want to do. But I think it's a concept that has really been very effective in at least a smaller community.
Thank you for that, Karen. A couple of comments have popped into the chat. J. Patrick Mullins says, building on Erica's very important point, the SHPO. Oh, here we got the poll results. Go ahead and give those a gander. Looks like inclusivity has 23%. That makes it top. Looks like the next one is being able to connect and engage with communities, both in person and over multiple platforms. We did already establish that legislation and codes and everything, that is also an incredibly important point. Does anybody want to comment on the results that you see here?
I will.
Go ahead.
I think that I thank you. First of all, thank you for the poll. I also think that your opinion might vary depending on which seat you're sitting in. So, you know, from it being in the middle, being part of a small friends group that's working on a specific property, you know, I might say, yeah, getting funding is the biggest problem. But in a more global space, I think the notion of adaptive reuse and what that means and how that can be accomplished is a very important one to consider. And if you did not see the comment that Beth Crawford made in the chat about really the vocabulary of preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, reconstruction, I would encourage you to look at that, because those all have, I think, a lens on a lot of these poll questions. And like I said, depending on which seat you currently sit in, you might have a different opinion. But I am grateful to see all of them. So thank you.
Yes, as am I as well. I did want to point out a couple more comments. Supporting Jennifer says, supporting new preservation leadership coming directly out of communities is so important. I think that outlook has really changed in the past few years from the old model of thinking we should go to the community and educate them about what they should preserve. And then Beth Crawford came back in, working with communities of color on historic resource surveys is very important. Our local preservation association worked on a survey of historic AME Zion churches across NYS, as well as African American history in Syracuse from 1820 to 1920. All right. Are there any more? And Jim, you can go ahead and stop sharing screen now. Are there any more comments that we've got from the room?
Just real quick, I'd like to, say, Amy, very good point about the different areas of, preservation, restoration. People generally just say, refer to historic preservation encompassing all of those things, but that is something that is of note. There's the different aspects that mean very different things. As a preservationist, we need to be careful to say what we are doing. Is it a rehabilitation? Is it a restoration? Is it a reconstruction? Or is it, full on full-on preservation. So that's a really good point. And to go back to Erica about going into the community, there was a project in Shallow neighborhood in Asheville that I was fortunate enough to go take a look at with the Preservation Society. And when asking the community about this particular building, they wanted to do something else with it, which we may have felt was really unfortunate. But if that's what the community wanted, then far be it from us to try to tell them what they need to do. So just to reinforce what Erica is saying, we are listening. And it's not our job to tell people what they need to do. Now, on the other hand, I would love to tell people on Charlotte Street exactly what to do, but we'll refrain from that for the moment. And that particular gentleman in Los Angeles with this sledgehammer, I have a few choice words for him as well, but we'll save that for another time.
Yes, that's right. This conversation always continues. As my point earlier on at the very beginning of this session, this is an ongoing discussion, ongoing conversation. It's not going away anytime soon. And David Rudd, would you like to say anything? Because you're popped up and unmuted right now.
No, it's been very interesting afternoon though.
Oh yeah, that's what we love to bring, an interesting afternoon. We hope that this has been an educational experience for everybody. We have among some of the best panelists here working across the country to help historic preservation causes, and certainly those more local as well. I did want to read a couple more comments in the chat. I know we're coming up on 3 o'clock here in about 12 minutes. I did want to make sure we had a little bit of time to wrap up and some for closing comments as well. Alan said working with the developers can be a win-win. The San Diego Padres wanted to tear down all the historic buildings in the East Village about 20 years ago. Long story, but Soho convinced the Padres' new owner to save them, readapt them into the new Petco ballpark. I think we were able to save 8 or 9 historic buildings, including the iconic Western Metal building left field. And now everyone loves the old buildings, giving the ballpark an identity to our past. Very interesting example, but still really great. Looks like Beth said, and one project can have components of each treatment, preserving historic components, reconstructing missing pieces, restoring deteriorated pieces. And J. Patrick Mullins says, in support of Karen's and Gus's point, we do have to respect people's rights and not be heavy-handed or tell people what they should value. The key is to encourage voluntary preservation, restoration through education on the one hand, and financial incentives, e.g. tax credits, on the other. All right, and at this point, I'd like to give our panelists maybe the opportunity to say any parting words, maybe any words for encouragement, anything they might want to bring up, any future fundraisers, maybe any reminders of any fundraisers coming up in this next year?
Well, we do. We have a gala in support of the Gustav Stickley House that's going to be held on October 6th. It's a Thursday evening, and it's 2 days before the Craftsman Farms Gala. So if you're heading east to Craftsman Farms, come a couple days early and come to the Gustav Stickley House event as well. You can get more details on it on our website in a week or so. We're still going through some of the details.
Yep, and the Craftsman Gala from Craftsman Farms, I did want to make sure that got mentioned. That should be coming up in October. Also,
October 8th,
great one. All right, and Alex, did you have something for us?
Yes, I just want to say thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I've taken copious notes today with different tidbits and things that people have shared, so it's been really informative for me as well. The Gamble House is in the midst of a Friends of the Gamble House membership push, so I will be happy to share information about joining and supporting us as a member of the Friends of the Gamble House in the chat. Thank you.
Excellent. And that goes for all of our panelists as well. If you have a cause, please make sure to put a link in the chat so everybody can see it before we head out for the day. Thank you also to Erica, and thank you also to Gus. We love to hear from you, and we look forward to connecting with you back at the GPI conference. And yes, the 36th National Arts and Crafts Conference at the Grove Park Inn is coming. We are returning again with full force, and it is February 17th through the 19th. We are, if you go to our registration page, please either call the Grove Park Inn if you would like a package, or if you would like to stay elsewhere but still be involved in the conference side of things, please make sure to get a conference events pass, and you can also do so from calling me up in my office. And let's see, what else? Does anybody else have any closing comments they'd like to make before I officially close this session out?
Yeah, I'd just like to say again, thank you. It's been an honor to be here. And I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in February.
Darn straight. We look forward to seeing every one of your smiling faces at GPI in February. With that, I would like to personally thank, aside from my family, my parents and my sisters who have kept me sane with all of their crazy laughter. I want to make sure they are thanked. I would like to thank Bruce Johnson for being, again, the face of arts and crafts. You still are, you know, retirement or not, you still are the face of arts and crafts. And if I'm, you know, if I come even close to you, I will be considered successful. Thank you again, Bruce, for all that you do. Thank you to everybody who came today. Thank you for everybody who came to our every single day to Arts and Crafts in August. I was happy to have you, and as long as I draw breath, I am happy to, you know, provide this virtual environment, and I'm happy to see you all at the Grove Park Inn in February. I look forward to it all, and that's all that I have. And for the next 7 minutes, you can say whatever you want to say, and I can close this, bring this session to a close. And again, thank you all.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Kate. I'm going to jump off.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
I just wanted to share.
Don't jump.
Thank you.
I just wanted to share that for properties that sometimes you can convince a developer to reuse a property for something else. One of the preservation groups that I'm in successfully convinced Apple to not demolish a historic theater, but instead to repurpose that historic theater for their flagship store in downtown LA in such a way that the renovations that the Apple company made are reversible. So the old theater could eventually at some point be turned back into a theater again. So there are success stories.
Yes, such an important thing to remember.
Now,
Please
hold
remember
on.
the success stories.
Hold
And-
on, hold on,
Go
hold
ahead.
on.
Go ahead.
I'm an Apple shareholder, and I take it that I feel that that's Apple's mission, is to protect what we as individuals want protected, including our privacy. It is a self-interest thing that they did, all right? And you can't take credit for it.
Oh goodness, we've got some opinions. But you know what? That's what makes part of the this community so great, is the knowing that everybody deeply cares about historic preservation and their sites. So again, I thank you all for coming and saying your piece and contributing to this topic that will continue to be a relevant topic for years and decades to come. And again, thank you so much to the panelists for taking time out of their Sunday to come and talk about historic preservation. I deeply thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. Oh, and lastly, please make sure that since there is 1 week left in the online shows, please make sure you go and support our hardworking online exhibitors. They still got new items coming in. Please support them and their businesses. So take care, everybody. And I'll see you when I see you.